topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show, where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Boy, do we have a great show for you today. And I'm going to really start off today's show because there's a couple of areas of law and that everybody's not playing fair with, so to say. So I'm going to bring up, right after I introduce you to our great expert, Attorney Michael Mandelbrot. There are several areas, and Michael and I started talking about this, that it's so important. This is why a show like this is so important, that you have a good law firm that's not trying to rip you off. And we're going to get into that today, because in the area of asbestos and also public insurance adjusting, a lot of problems in that area too. But let me welcome you to our great expert, our guest. We're going to be, actually, this topic is so important, we're going to be spending the entire 50 minutes of the show on it today. Let me introduce you to Attorney Michael Mandelbrot. He's with the Asbestos Legal Center. Hi, Michael.
Stephen, great to see you again. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, I got to tell you, we started talking about this last time, and we do have a little time. I want people to know who you are, but it was so amazing when you said you had originally tried to become a sports agent, and that's what I did. I was a sports agent, and it's a tough business to get into because you've got a lot of attorneys out there giving these kids money up front to sign with them, and there's a few people out there like you and I who don't. I never did that in the 12 years I was an agent. But I was so amazed to hear that was the first thing that you wanted to get into.
Well, I appreciate that. I would say generally lawyers are up there with used car salesmen when people talk about lawyers. And it's, and I like to try and separate myself from those people. But even in my field, mesothelioma, and representing victims of asbestos diseases, on the plaintiff side, we do have lawyers who do things that are dishonest, corrupt. They engage in conduct that could be called racketeering. And it really impacts not just the lawyers in my field, but it also impacts every future victim of asbestos disease. Because if these lawyers, if there's only a certain pool of money that is available to asbestos victims, and these lawyers, through dishonesty, are getting much more of these trust funds than they should, that's a problem. And it's something that has gone on across the country for about the last 10 to 15 years. And by my estimates, at least probably $5 billion has been misappropriated by lawyers in my field. And it's a lot of money. And clearly, it bothers me and it impacts me.
Well, I got to tell you, we've been doing the show now. I believe this is our 4th month. I believe it might be 3. But just in that small period of time, we've had 3 attorneys who listen to your show who've contacted us wanting to do a show like yours. And we tell them, this is exclusive. But then they'll go, well, what will it take to replace them? And it's like, that's like the biggest red flag for me right there. Just like when I was a sports agent and the kid would go, well, how much would you give me? That's red flag. You can do your business the right way. And your business, Michael, is very competitive. Before we go there, tell people about yourself and your law firm.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My name's Michael Mandelbrot. For the past 30 years, I have been representing victims of asbestos-related diseases and cancers. So you see those commercials on TV. Have you been diagnosed with mesothelioma? That is an asbestos-related cancer. The only cause of mesothelioma is exposure to asbestos. And that's one of the reasons why lawyers advertise so extensively for these cases. Is mesothelioma cases are very big cases, typically worth at least $2 million, typically more. And that's why lawyers will advertise for those, and almost exclusively those. Unlike those lawyers, I also represent victims of other asbestos diseases, lung cancer, asbestosis, as well as a variety of other cancers, colon cancers, stomach cancers, and other cancers related to asbestos. This is one of the things that separates me from a lot of lawyers in my field, is they only want the mesothelioma cases, the most valuable cases. And that's where you started, where a lot of, or all of, the corruption and the fraud that takes place in my industry involves those cases. As you mentioned, it is very difficult, especially when you're from a relatively small city in California, to find mesothelioma clients. There's only 2,000 to 3,000 people a year diagnosed in the United States with mesothelioma. And, that brings me to one of the issues that I see in our field is there is a number of doctors around the country, one specifically at UCLA, and these are doctors who treat victims of mesothelioma. There are only maybe 5 doctors around the country who really specialize in mesothelioma victims. These doctors should be completely independent of lawyers. But what you have is lawyers who will give these doctors money, whether it's directly or we'll call it through their charity, $500,000, $1 million. And by giving them that quote unquote donation, all of a sudden that lawyer's intake packet will be in that doctor's waiting room. So everyone who walks in has an opportunity to grab their packet. And it's not advertised as a lawyer's packet. The headline on the packet is "Your Roadmap When You Are Diagnosed with Mesothelioma." That's the headline on the packet. It doesn't say it's from a lawyer, but so what happens is, 80% of the people who are diagnosed, who, are scared and they know there's other lawyers out there, they end up getting sent to one of these 5 doctors. They walk in the waiting room, and one of the questions these doctors will ask them is, "Hey, are you currently represented by a lawyer?" The patient doesn't think, if they are, of course they'll say they are, but most of
Right.
them aren't at that early stage. And when they say they aren't, all of a sudden they leave that waiting room and they effectively are, because they pick up that packet, they talk to the receptionist who recommends these lawyers, and the next thing you know, all of these patients from around the country diagnosed with mesothelioma end up through at these very specific lawyers' offices who donate to these doctors. And to me, that is wrong. And they end up getting bad representation. And it's very, very unfortunate. That's just one of the examples. We can get into others as we go on. But I am dedicated to victims of asbestos diseases. That is what I do, and that's what I've done.
You know, Michael, I was just thinking when you were telling, is that, you know, when a player, go back to my sports agent days, would, you know, basically ask me for a bribe, I would go, you know what, when I'm negotiating for you, I can't give the team money and bribe them. You've got to have somebody good. And, you know, if I can't sell you on how good I am as a negotiator, you don't need me. And I'm thinking about, again, because I think we've gotten 3 or 4 phone calls from attorneys just from your show, and it is very competitive. You know, to me, I want people to know that's a major red flag. You know, now we're hearing about packets being in doctors' offices. Let's go on, because we've got so many questions for you, Michael.
Sure.
And I got to tell you, I love the way you explain to people about asbestos and mesothelioma. Go to the first question. At a minimum, what is needed to file an asbestos lawsuit or a claim?
Good question. As I tell people, every case starts with a diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. So if somebody calls me and they say, you know, I worked in a shipyard, I worked in a power plant, I had asbestos in my home, my first question is, tell me a little bit about your health. Because the first thing I'm looking for are breathing problems or lung problems. Obviously, if they've already been diagnosed with lung cancer, that is a telltale sign for me, especially if they have a history of exposure to asbestos. So at a minimum, I don't worry about their exposures to asbestos as much as I do about a diagnosis, because the only way you can file a case or represent claimants with the $30 billion bankruptcy trust is if they have a diagnosis of an asbestos-related disease. What if they have not been diagnosed? The first thing that we do is we send out a medical release and we'll order their most recent chest x-ray. Because by reviewing that chest x-ray, or preferably a CT scan, we can send that off to an expert who will determine whether or not they see any underlying asbestos-related disease. They're not diagnosing them, but they are giving us the early, as we investigate, whether or not they see indications of asbestos-related disease on the lungs, scarring, perfusion, thickening of the lungs, the various things that, opacities as they call them, the various things that these experts may see. But it all starts with a diagnosis.
Michael, let me just, do you normally get this from a like an oncologist or a pulmonologist?
Well, it all depends on who the the intake has seen. If they have been to a pulmonologist, typically we will try and get those records, because there may also be what's known as a pulmonary function test. If there is a PFT or a pulmonary function test, that gives us various breathings, measures their breathing in a lot of different ways. So we will order that as well. Oftentimes people haven't seen an oncologist. Oncologists are usually seen if somebody has already been diagnosed with cancer. So if someone's been diagnosed with cancer, absolutely immediately to the oncologist. Sometimes it just may start with their personal physician, whether it's Kaiser or Sutter or whatever their local physician is. And hopefully they've got a chest x-ray.
Can
If
just
not,
a regular family doctor diagnose this?
No, because the start is like I said, the reading of the x-ray, and we have to send that x-ray off to an expert, and what we'll call an expert radiologist. They're known as a certified B reader, and only certified B readers can diagnose this underlying asbestos disease. And it takes various classes, a certification, and then updating it I think it's every 2 years also. So a family doctor cannot diagnose it. Now, for example, if somebody has cancer and they do go to an oncologist and get a biopsy done, sure, that, they, through a biopsy, they can diagnose the mesothelioma or lung cancer, but not underlying asbestos disease. That you need a special doctor for, a certified radiologist. And if that's why we spend a lot of money sending films to these doctors, and they come back negative, but it's okay, because at least it gives the patients peace of mind, or the potential clients, right, because they know they don't have underlying asbestos disease. And these doctors only charge us a few $100 for a reading of these films. So, it's okay to, pay that few $100, because you never know when you may end up with a client. So exactly, it's worth it. And, we like to help anyone we can. So that's just how we do it.
What if a person doesn't know where they were exposed to asbestos at?
It typically starts with a personal interview. Now, you say that, and, most people, if they are sick, they're going to know where they were exposed. They're going to immediately think, oh, I worked in the shipyard. I worked in those people. I assume those aren't the ones you're talking about. We're talking about maybe a wife who never worked in asbestos, and a female age 75, never worked in asbestos in her life, never worked at a construction yard, never lived in a house where she knew they had asbestos. How could she have gotten exposed to asbestos? So somebody like her, for example, first thing we would look for is secondary exposure. Was there exposure through a family member who was exposed to asbestos, who then brought the asbestos fibers home on their clothes? So, for example, if she was married to somebody who worked in shipyard, power plants, refineries, auto mechanics, they would bring their work clothes home. She would be responsible typically for washing them, shake them out, doing the laundry. That could be one way that she could have been exposed. We've recently mentioned Johnson & Johnson's baby powder. A lot of people didn't really think about that as well. Maybe one of the schools that she went to, because every single school built before 1970 had asbestos in it. Maybe one of the schools that she went to had some construction or remodeling or improvements going on while she was in school there, or maybe one of her colleges. There has been a lot of different ways that we can prove these. It typically, involves an extensive interview in non-traditional ways of the typical way people think individuals are exposed, through their occupation. But there are a lot of other ways people can be exposed to asbestos. And we have had what's known as idiopathic, we'll see it on the pathology report, idiopathic mesothelioma, which it says known. Idiopathic means no known cause. And if it's mesothelioma, the only known cause is exposure to asbestos. So, and that's not by me, that's by the medical experts who've, tested mesothelioma and for the last 100 years have been researching and diagnosing and trying to come up with a cure. But there is no question that the only known cause of mesothelioma is exposure to asbestos. So a lot of interviewing, a lot of educating on different ways people could be exposed, and a lot of investigation.
We just got a text from Julian in Baltimore. I'm really enjoying your show. It's about time someone came out with a show like this. Can you tell me what is asbestos and where in the home may asbestos hazards be found?
Great question. Well, let's first talk about what is asbestos. Asbestos is a mineral or a fiber. It's like a raw, it comes out, it's like a, well, there's three types of asbestos. It's a mineral or a fiber. It comes out of the ground. If you have ever been out in the sun and you'll see some rocks that have like sort of a shiny layering in it, and they can pull apart very easily. That little seam running through there is in fact asbestos. It's a naturally occurring substance in the earth. How is it? Well, it's mined, and through various processes is turned into raw asbestos in various fiber lengths. Those fibers are then added to various products because primarily of the insulation capabilities of asbestos. Prior to 1980, and really I'd say 1975, there was no, people didn't know about the hazards of asbestos publicly. So companies were putting asbestos in dozens, if not hundreds of products. In the family home, the common thing you see is the popcorn ceilings. That's the one that most people talk about and see, and especially because it's easily delaminated or dusty. If you jump up and you touch it, it's going to rain down on you typically like snow. And that's the one that everybody knows about. A huge one was drywall. It was added to drywall and the joint compound in many homes. Exterior stucco, which breaks very easily, had asbestos. Vinyl asbestos tile, or VAT, used in most kitchens and bathrooms, had asbestos in it. Of course, the ducting or the insulation around duct pipes had asbestos in it. One of the worst products that typically led up to the family home was known as asbestos cement or transite flue pipe. That was used for sewer and water pipe. Now, residents of a home typically won't have exposure to this, but if someone did remodeling on their home or was around during construction, absolutely there would be exposure. Carpet has been known to have asbestos in it. Window coverings, anything you can think of where insulation, it would be good to have roofing materials, of course, in the home, roofing paper. They all had asbestos in them. You think about, some uncommon products that I've seen over the years that you wouldn't even think about. All those curtains that they used to have in schools, those were all asbestos. Ironing board covers, always made of asbestos before 1970. Here's a good one. Christmas tree flock. That flock
No.
that was asbestos. That was asbestos. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of products that were added to. Hopefully I've covered a number in the family home, but it's just amazing at how many products it was added to prior to 1980.
Wow. I guess a better question would be, what doesn't have asbestos in it?
It's a good question. Wood and metal typically, but then, those pipes I mentioned, the sewer and water pipes, those are essentially metal pipes coated with asbestos, coated with an asbestos cement lining. Wood. Wood would be wood and metal generally would be the two that I would think of, but in the family home, it was a product that was used extensively. Certainty, I see these companies, but they were around in like the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. USG, Certainty, Georgia Pacific, and up until very recently. These are all companies that you can find their catalogs online that have tons of asbestos products in them. And they were for the family homes in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And I've got a lot of those catalogs I'd be happy to share.
Michael, how are people actually exposed to asbestos?
That's a great question. One of the legal terms that we use is friable, which to me just means dusty. Was it in a form that it emitted dust? Now, there are various industrial hygiene experts who under the circumstances that someone would have, for example, in the shipyard, are able to use a lighting and measure the actual fibers or the amount of fibers they would be exposed to, realizing that there are literally millions of asbestos fibers in one gasket, in one strip of drywall. The thing you're really looking for is friable or dusty. So what we see a lot is, for example, people who mixed, like say you had joint compound, it would come in like a 50-pound sack. You would pour it some in a bucket and mix it with water. That pouring it into the bucket in the mixing. Then once it's dry, they have to tape it and sand it. People are exposed to asbestos, just walking down the street, even today, because it may be in brakes, for example. And so there is what we call background exposure that we all have, but there are ways to measure exposures, some greater than others. But what the experts will say, and without getting technical, is it doesn't take a lot of exposure to develop an asbestos disease. It doesn't take a lot. Some people might be exposed their whole lives and never develop an asbestos disease. But other people, it doesn't take a lot of exposure. It all depends on, I guess, our chemical makeup in a lot of ways. Who's going to get it and who's not. You see, some guys worked together in the shipyard 30 years, one guy, and smoked, and he's fine. And the other guy who took precautions, he ends up getting sick. So you just don't really know. But exposure, think of dusty, think of mixing, sanding, taping, sweeping, things like that that can cause exposures. Doing laundry, like I said, pouring baby powder, for example. Those are ways that we commonly think of: grinding, sanding, taping, cutting.
We are here talking to Michael Mendelbrot. He is an attorney, and you cover the whole United States. Is that correct, Michael?
That is true. Now, I'm not licensed in every state, of course. We do work with attorneys from around the country, but typically you can represent anybody who is exposed to asbestos we can represent anyone who's exposed to asbestos in California. And what we found is there's people from around the country. They were in the military, were stationed in California for 3 weeks, 6 weeks. That's enough for us to represent them. I'm also licensed in Oregon as well, and we have some very closely affiliated, successful, fantastic firms that we work with as well in states where we cannot represent someone personally. But there are some very, very good lawyers out there.
That's funny because the text that we just got in from Paul in Portland, Oregon. Great show. I wish I'd have found it sooner. My house was built in 1970. What do I need to do to look to see if I've got anything that has asbestos in it?
Okay, great question, Paul. Now, I already mentioned a lot of different products, the popcorn ceilings, the drywall. If you have those popcorn ceilings in your house, chances are that contains asbestos. What you can do, you can always send or bring a sample to somebody who will test it. It's usually like $50 or $75, either like a geological testing or even you can type in asbestos survey on Google. And it's not, if you bring in a small sample, they can test them for you. But the common things, I think of is the popcorn ceilings, drywall, exterior stucco, which is always a tough one because you think, hey, if I have it in my home, it sure would be nice to get rid of it. And that is also, I've got to tell the listeners out there, if it is in your home, it's a catch-22 because you want the asbestos out of there, but it is tremendously expensive to abate asbestos. You've got to use a variety of procedures and wet down and glove bagging, and people have to come in who are certified wearing special suits. One of your alternatives, less expensive, but it keeps asbestos in the home, is encapsulating it. Putting, for example, a coating over the asbestos so that it's not friable or dusty. That's why if it's in walls and it's got a good paint or a good coating, then chances are it's not going to be friable or dusty. Those are the products.
I remember in Texas, many years ago, a lot of people lost their homes because they found out that the building material was out of China and it had asbestos in it. A lot of people lost their homes over that.
I know, because, homes like that, and I think it was, as they called it, the Chinese drywall that was coming in back then.
Yes.
And
yes,
when your whole home is constructed with drywall, that's something you can't really remove. So you're stuck in this dilemma. Do I really want to live in a new house that was just built with any illegal material, in essence, an illegal substance? And no. And I don't know what ended up happening, but I would suspect that if you had one of those homes, I think you probably got a settlement, but homes that were built like that lost a tremendous amount of value and ultimately had to be torn down if they weren't finished.
Yes, I remember that.
And, you know, it's sort of a sign of our times. We want less expensive things, and we're often turning to, and you just gave the example of China, but we turn to other countries as well. And a lot of times you get what you pay for. And, you know, it may cost a little bit more to get it from the United States, but at least, you know, in some respects, it's being tested. We've got standards. We've got OSHA. We've got a variety of means and methods to ensure that at least we hope the public is safe, where I don't think we have those in other countries.
We got another text. This is from Gary in Bakersfield, California. He says, I am outraged now after listening to your show that there are law firms out there that would take advantage of people. What are things that we should look for that would be red flags?
That's a great question. I think one is taking on too many clients. I think if one of these firms says, you know, look at us, we represent hundreds of people. It is so difficult to represent one person, to do the investigation for one client. If they say, well, we've got 40 lawyers and we've got office, to me, that is a red flag. I think on an individual basis, those clients do not get good representation. That is, you know, the first thing. The second thing, well, and that sort of leads me to what a lot of these firms will do when you have a lot of clients is instead of looking at each case individually, they will settle them in a big group. And it sounds like they're getting a lot of money from one defendant. Oh, we just settled for, you know, $10 million with whoever it was. Let's just use Georgia Pacific as an example because they're in a big bankruptcy fight. But when you've got 200 clients who that money has to be split among, typically those individual clients are getting far, far less than they should from Georgia Pacific because the lawyers are happy to settle in a, you know, in a big group because as a firm, they still take a third and they're happy with their $3 million, but the individual clients end up getting peanuts on that. So that would be one thing I would be concerned about. Also, I mean, background and experience of the lawyers, because asbestos hasn't been regularly used now for 40 years in the United States. So if your lawyers don't understand all of the different products that contained asbestos, who made them, who's now responsible since these companies have changed hands, and also don't understand the 60 asbestos trusts, that would be a red flag to me. These asbestos trusts are very, very valuable for victims. Another red flag for me is if they say that they are on the board or a trustee or a fiduciary on asbestos trust. To me, that is a bad thing when lawyers who are filing claims with an asbestos trust are also overseeing the trust, because what that means is they are getting favorable treatment at the expense of everybody else. And everybody else is getting audited and they're not. So if they tout themselves as, hey, I am on the board or I'm a trustee of the asbestos trust funds, that to me would be a big red flag, a huge one. And that knocks out a lot of your big firms. That is $30 billion that is out there for victims that I think these lawyers see as their personal piggy banks. And so if they are a trustee or a fiduciary with any asbestos trust, I would steer clear from them. Those are just a couple of tips.
And I know it's probably different for everybody, but how much is an asbestos claim worth?
It is different, but I can give you some very good estimates. Some of the most valuable trust funds are in California. So let's just say if they're exposed on the West Coast versus the East Coast, average claimant mesothelioma on the West Coast, probably about $1 million from just the trust funds. About $1 million, maybe more, maybe about 1.5. If they're on the East Coast, and we're only exposed on the East Coast, so they probably do not qualify for some of the bigger trusts, because you said all clients are different. True. Maybe $300,000 to $400,000 their trust claims would be worth.
It's a big difference.
It is a big difference, but it is still a lot of money. It's still a good bit of recovery. And maybe more than that. They very well may have been on a Navy ship that came into California, so it qualifies for the big trust funds. They don't have to live in California to qualify. They just have to have exposure to those California companies in some way at some time. Like an example would be, there's one company, Western MacArthur or Western Asbestos. During World War II, they built hundreds and hundreds, and about 800, as they called them, Victory or Liberty ships. They were used as troop transports. Western Asbestos was the insulation contractor on every one of those ships. They insulated every one of them. Those ships built at these couple of shipyards, if you ever sailed on those ships at any time, you qualify for that California, that valuable trust. So you don't have to live in California, but maybe if you just sailed on one of those Western built ships, you would qualify. I don't think a lot of lawyers know that about the Western Trust, but we sure do. And it's a way that we're able to qualify our clients and prove their exposure. So
what is usually the time commitment necessary if a person wants to file a case?
I love that question. And I'll tell you why, because that is a big concern of clients is, how much time is involved. And luckily, you're dealing with a lawyer who doesn't bill by the hour ever, and who's never sent out a bill. We only, no fee unless we win is the line that a lot of lawyers use. And
so you work on a contingency basis.
On a contingency, exactly. And so, surprisingly, the amount of time that a client has to be involved, even though it is a major multi-million-dollar case, is minimal. And I'll tell you why. The client is only involved typically before trial in two aspects. One, investigation, phone calls, correspondence back and forth with the lawyers in order to investigate the case. And two, their deposition. The deposition is the client's opportunity to tell their story about how they were exposed to asbestos and how it has affected their lives. These depositions are usually done in about I think there's a time limit in California, 20 hours. So 20 hours of questioning, about 3 days. That sounds like a lot, but that's it. Between answering correspondence and the 3-day deposition commitment, unless your case goes to trial, which maybe 0.5% of cases actually go to trial. Unless your case goes to trial and we want you there, that's it. So the time commitment is minimal. Answering correspondence from the lawyers and phone calls, maybe not more than one every 2 weeks at most. And then the deposition. That's your one big commitment for the case. And we know that our clients, especially those with lung cancer and mesothelioma, they don't have the ability to travel to us. So we notice depositions right outside their home, oftentimes in their home, or at a local hotel, a Holiday Inn, a Courtyard. We'll rent out a conference room, so our clients don't have to travel either. That is I guess the follow-up question is, do we have to travel? And the answer is no. No travel and very little time commitment.
Well, that's so good to know. And this is a last question, and I think it's the perfect question. Tell people why they should retain you as their attorney.
Integrity, honesty, dedication, and commitment to the victims of asbestos disease. I don't have I'm not a fiduciary for these trusts. I just want these victims to get the recovery that they deserve. I look at every case individually, and my clients, they mean a lot to me. I don't want to say they become like family, but I always have clients, and I'm surprised I forgot to turn my phone off, hasn't rung, because my clients, many years, even after their case is essentially done, they're still calling me. And I experience results. I think hopefully that sums it up. And I do appreciate the question, Steve.
And I know from our conversations we've had, you really do care. And it's so obvious. Let's give everybody your phone number and your website address.
Great. 1-800-970-DUST, which is 3878. That is my call center. You can call me direct at 415-895-5175. And mesothelioma.pro. Mesothelioma, a tough one to spell. MESOTHELIOMA. Mesothelioma.pro. Feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you.
We are so lucky to have you, Michael, and your show goes by so fast. We moved it up to 50 minutes, and I still had tons of questions, and we still had people texting their questions in, but we'll save those for next month when you come on with us again.
I appreciate it, Steve, and I look forward to it, and I will see you in August. I'll see you in August,
yes.
Steve. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Steve. Have a good day.
Michael is an incredible attorney when it comes to asbestos. He's going to give you the right information. I trust him totally. That's it for us today. I'm sorry I didn't get to the rest of your text. I knew this was going to be a very popular show. Michael will be back next month. And we'll see you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.